The cold marble of the kitchen island dug sharply into my lower back. I was completely trapped. Not by a stranger, but by Maya. She was my best friend's older sister, and the absolute bane of my existence. Maya stepped perfectly into my personal space, leaving me absolutely no room to breathe. The heavy bass of the party music from the living room faded into a dull, distant hum. All I could focus on was her. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, glinting with a dangerous kind of amusement. Her fingertips lightly brushed the bare skin just below the hem of my crop top. I stopped breathing entirely. Slowly, deliberately, her thumb slipped underneath the soft fabric of my shirt. A jolt of electricity shot straight up my spine. Her skin was warm, casually tracing the sensitive curve of my waist. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt painfully dry. "I'm perfectly fine," I chanted frantically in my head. "I'm not," my racing heart screamed back in pure panic. She leaned in closer, our heights perfectly aligned. I could feel her warm breath against the delicate shell of my ear. "You've been staring at me all night," she whispered. That low, husky tone sent immediate shivers down my neck. "I haven't," I lied. My voice betrayed me instantly with a pathetic, shaky tremble. Maya chuckled softly in the quiet space. The sound vibrated beautifully against my collarbone. "Liar," she murmured against my skin. Her hand slid a fraction higher on my waist. I felt the gentle, deliberate scrape of her nails against my bare skin. My knees genuinely threatened to give out right there on the kitchen floor. If her sister, Sarah, walked in right now, I would be completely dead. But I couldn't move away. I was entirely paralyzed by the intense, suffocating pull she had on me. She smelled like vanilla and something dark, something wildly intoxicating. "You think I don't notice the way you look at me when Sarah isn't paying attention?" she asked. "I don't know what you're talking about," I managed to choke out. "Are you sure about that?" she teased gently. Her dark gaze dropped slowly to my trembling lips. The air between us felt incredibly heavy. It was charged with a tension I had been secretly burying for 6 long years. I had crushed on Maya since I was 16 years old. Now, at 22, she was finally looking back at me. And she was being absolutely ruthless about it. She took one more step closer. Our bodies were now almost flush against each other. I could feel the undeniable heat radiating off her skin. My hands gripped the edge of the counter behind me until my knuckles turned stark white. I desperately wanted to push her away to save whatever was left of my pride. I equally wanted to pull her closer until there was zero space left between us. "Your heart is beating so fast," she observed quietly. She moved her free hand and pressed it flat against my chest. She could feel exactly what she was doing to me in real time. She absolutely knew. She knew everything, and she was playing with me for sport. The absolute worst part was that I was letting her do it. I loved that she was pushing my boundaries. I hated that I had zero defense against her charm. "Just breathe," she whispered softly. Her dark eyes softened for a fleeting, genuine second. Then, the playful, predatory smirk returned instantly to her flawless face. "Admit it," she demanded softly, her thumb stroking my waist again. "Admit what?" I played dumb. My deeply flushed cheeks had already told her the entire truth. "Admit that you're entirely obsessed with me." I clamped my mouth shut, firmly refusing to give her the verbal satisfaction. Maya simply hummed, a low, velvety sound of pure approval. Her thumb stroked my skin one last, lingering time. Then, she slowly and agonizingly pulled her hand back. The sudden loss of her physical touch left me instantly cold. She stepped back gracefully. She picked up her whiskey glass from the counter as if she hadn't just rearranged my entire universe. See you around, kid, she winked effortlessly. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink, keeping eye contact. Then she turned and walked right back out toward the loud, pulsing party. I stood there completely frozen. My chest was heaving. My mind was completely short-circuiting. She knew my deepest, most embarrassing secret in the world. And something told me she was never going to let me live it down peacefully. Tomorrow, I had to go over to their house for the traditional Sunday dinner. I was walking straight into the lion's den. And God help me, I couldn't wait. Standing on the front porch felt exactly like waiting for an execution. My palms sweated violently against the plastic wrapper of the flowers. Sarah swung the door open with her usual bright smile. She pulled me into a suffocating, tight hug. She smelled like citrus and absolute innocence. I stepped carefully into the familiar hallway. My heart hammered dangerously against my ribs. Their mother called out a warm greeting from the dining room. I walked hesitantly toward the lively voices. I tried desperately to steady my completely erratic breathing. Maya was already seated at the large mahogany table. She wore a dark silk blouse that looked elegantly dangerous. Her piercing eyes locked onto mine the exact second I entered. A wicked smirk played at the very corner of her mouth. She looked utterly unaffected by last night. I felt like I was completely falling apart. Take a seat, their father said warmly. He pointed blindly to the single empty chair. It was the chair directly across from Maya. Of course, the universe decided I had to sit exactly there. I sat down rigidly. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on my empty plate. Sarah immediately began rambling about our upcoming college exams. I nodded along automatically. I offered meaningless, hollow sounds of agreement. The hot food was quickly served. My stomach was tied in severe, painful knots. Maya casually picked up her crystal wine glass. Her dark gaze drifted lazily over my flushed face. So, Maya started. Her voice was a low, incredibly smooth drawl. Did you sleep well after the party last night? She asked directly. Sarah laughed loudly at the question. She entirely missed the suffocating tension filling the room. She always sleeps like a rock, Sarah answered cheerfully for me. Maya's eyes never left mine. They gleamed with a terrifyingly predatory amusement. Is that so? Maya murmured. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her red wine. Suddenly, I felt something light brush against my ankle under the table. My breath hitched violently in my throat. I quickly grabbed my iced water glass. My violently shaking hands almost spilled it everywhere. The soft pressure instantly returned. It moved slowly and agonizingly up my bare calf. She had audaciously slipped her foot out of her heel. Maya was actually doing this right now. Her oblivious parents were sitting less than 2 feet away. Her silk-stockinged toes dragged up my trembling shin. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth practically ached. This chicken is amazing, I practically choked out. I was desperate for any normal distraction. I'm so glad you like it, her mother beamed. Under the heavy oak table, Maya's foot slid higher. It purposefully brushed the delicate hem of my dress. My sweaty hands gripped the edges of my chair with white-knuckled terror. She was aggressively testing my absolute limits. She wanted to see exactly how far she could push me. I glared intensely at her across the table. I silently and desperately begged her to stop. Maya simply raised one perfectly arched eyebrow in a silent challenge. She casually cut a small piece of her steak. She chewed it slowly while maintaining unwavering eye contact. Her toes slipped stealthily under the thin fabric of my dress. They traced the highly sensitive skin of my inner knee. A sharp, completely involuntary gasp escaped my lips. The entire dinner table immediately went dead silent. Are you okay? Sarah asked loudly. She looked at me with genuine, sisterly concern. I just accidentally bit my tongue, I lied terribly. My face burned with a fiery, humiliating red blush. You need to be more careful, Maya said smoothly. Her tone dripped with absolutely fake sympathy. You wouldn't want to hurt yourself, she added softly. There was a hidden, thrilling threat in her velvet voice. Her wandering foot moved a dangerous fraction higher. It rested deliberately close to my bare mid-thigh. My racing heart was beating entirely out of control. I was absolutely sure everyone in the room could hear it. I was entirely at her twisted mercy. I was perfectly trapped in my best friend's quiet dining room. I tried forcefully to refocus my spinning mind on Sarah's voice. Sarah had thankfully started talking about her classes again. It was a completely useless effort. All my heightened senses were entirely zeroed in on Maya. She traced agonizingly perfect circles on my sensitive thigh. My skin literally burned straight through the fabric. Every single time Sarah looked away, Maya's foot pressed firmer. I was convinced I was going to spontaneously combust. Suddenly, I aggressively dropped my heavy silver fork onto my plate. It made a very loud, startling clatter. I quickly dove straight under the table to retrieve it. I desperately needed to break the suffocating eye contact. Down in the hidden darkness, I reached out blindly. I grabbed her intruding ankle with my trembling hand. I dug my nervous fingers slightly into her soft skin. It was a silent, desperate physical plea for mercy. I looked up briefly into the shadows. I saw her elegantly crossed legs. I saw her single, teasingly dangling black high heel. I quickly re-emerged from under the long table. I placed the dropped fork carefully back onto the clean cloth. Maya's wandering foot was finally gone. It had safely retreated back to her own side. She was smiling softly into her half-empty wine glass. She looked incredibly and infuriatingly pleased with herself. She had undoubtedly won this silent, terrifying round. She knew it perfectly well. The absolute worst part was yet to come. I knew she was just getting started with me. This torturous family dinner was only half over. Dessert was still on the way. I swallowed incredibly hard. I suddenly realized I was hopelessly addicted to this game. Her dark eyes flicked up to meet mine once again. I didn't look away nervously this time. I held her intense, predatory stare. I silently accepted the dangerous challenge she was laying out. If she wanted to play this highly inappropriate game, I would play back. The dangerous electricity between us crackled silently. It went completely unnoticed by the rest of the happy family. Tomorrow was Monday. I knew exactly where Maya went for her morning coffee. The bell above the cafe door chimed sharply. I had been sitting in the corner booth for 40 minutes. My black coffee had gone completely cold. Morning sunlight cut starkly through the large glass windows. It cast deep, cinematic shadows across the polished floorboards. The high-contrast lighting made the entire room feel incredibly intense. I was banking on a very specific, quiet routine. Sarah had once casually mentioned her older sister's severe caffeine addiction. Maya always came to this exact spot at 7:30 on Monday mornings. It was currently 7:28. The espresso machine hissed violently in the background. A barista shouted out a random, complicated order. I ignored all the chaotic background noise. I was entirely hyper-focused on the glass front entrance. Every time the heavy wooden door opened, my breath hitched painfully. The anticipation was absolutely killing me. I rehearsed my opening line 20 different times in my head. It needed to sound casual, effortless, and entirely in control. I wanted to wipe that smug, knowing look right off Maya's flawless face. I wanted to prove I wasn't just Sarah's quiet, easily flustered best friend. At exactly 7:30, the brass door handle turned. Maya walked in. She looked effortlessly and utterly devastating. She wore a crisp white button-down shirt tucked neatly into dark slacks. The harsh morning light caught the sharp, elegant angles of her jaw. She exuded a quiet, commanding authority that demanded absolute attention. She didn't see me sitting in the corner right away. She walked straight toward the busy ordering counter. I took a deep, shaky breath to steady my trembling hands. I stood up quickly and intercepted her path. "I already ordered for you," I said smoothly. She stopped walking just inches from my chest. Her dark eyes widened for a fraction of a second in genuine surprise. Then, that familiar, predatory smirk slowly curved her painted lips. "Did you now?" she asked quietly. Her voice was a low, melodic purr that sent pure electricity down my spine. "An iced Americano," I replied, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. "No sugar, double shot." I handed the sweating plastic cup directly toward her. Maya didn't take it immediately. She stepped slightly closer into my personal space. The physical gap between us practically vanished into thin air. I could immediately smell that intoxicating, dark vanilla scent again. "You've been paying very close attention to me," she noted softly. "I just have a really good memory," I countered, keeping my voice perfectly level. I fiercely refused to back down this time. I held the cold cup steady in the air between us. Finally, she reached out her hand to take it. Instead of just grabbing the plastic, her long fingers wrapped deliberately over mine. Her skin was cool from the crisp morning air. My entire arm instantly erupted in uncontrollable goosebumps. She didn't pull the heavy cup away. She just held my hand holding her iced coffee. Her thumb began to stroke the sensitive skin of my knuckles. The tension stretched tighter than a highly tuned piano wire. My pulse hammered frantically against the sides of my throat. I was desperately trying to maintain my cool, unaffected exterior. My carefully planned script completely vanished from my short-circuiting brain. "So," Maya murmured, leaning in slightly closer. "What exactly is your endgame here?" "I don't have an endgame," I lied effortlessly. "I'm simply being a very polite friend." Maya chuckled softly. The sound was a dark, rich vibration in the quiet cafe. "You drove all the way across town at 7 in the morning. You bought my exact, highly specific coffee order. And your hands are currently shaking right now." She stepped even closer, her lips hovering dangerously near my ear. "That isn't polite friendship," she whispered smoothly. "That is stalking, sweetheart." The sudden pet name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Sweetheart. My carefully constructed facade instantly crumbled into pathetic dust. I wanted to sink directly into the wooden floorboards. I tried gently to pull my hand back, but her grip tightened slightly. It wasn't painful, just incredibly firm and highly possessive. "Don't run away now," she chided gently. "You came all this way just to play with me." She pulled back just enough to look deeply into my panicked eyes. "I genuinely admire the bravery," she said honestly. "But you are completely out of your league." She finally released my trembling hand and took the plastic cup. She took a long, slow sip from the green straw. Her dark eyes never left mine, drinking me in along with the bitter caffeine. "Thanks for the coffee," she said, her voice dripping with pure amusement. "I'll let you pay for dinner next time." Before my frozen brain could even process that massive statement, she turned around. She walked out the glass door with perfect, infuriating grace. Dinner. She had practically just asked me out on a real date. Or maybe she was just asserting her absolute, crushing dominance again. I collapsed heavily back into the dark leather corner booth. I pressed my cold palms tightly against my fiercely burning cheeks. My brilliant counterattack had failed spectacularly. She had effortlessly turned my ambush into her own personal victory lap. The power dynamic was entirely flipped on its head once more. I was losing this psychological war terribly. The rich scent of roasted beans offered zero comfort to my spinning head. I took a sip of my own cold coffee and instantly grimaced. The bitter taste grounded my flying thoughts slightly. I pulled out my phone and stared blankly at the dark screen. I had half a mind to text Sarah and cancel our plans for the entire week. Running away seemed like the only logical survival tactic right now. But running away meant totally giving up. It meant accepting a humiliating defeat. And despite the terrifying rate of my heartbeat, I wasn't a coward. Maya clearly liked a good challenge. She had practically dared me to keep trying to beat her. Out of my league, I muttered quietly to myself in the empty booth. Maybe I actually was. Maybe she was a grandmaster playing against a complete novice. But novices could learn new tricks. Novices could adapt to the changing rules. I forcefully shoved my phone back into my jacket pocket. I grabbed my canvas bag and headed straight for the exit. The bright morning sun hit my face, warm and blinding. The cinematic shadows of the street seemed to point me directly forward. Tomorrow, I had a long study session scheduled with Sarah at the university library. The game was far from being over. It was truthfully only just beginning. The university library was a massive fortress of absolute silence. Dust motes danced lazily in the thick shafts of afternoon sunlight. The cinematic lighting made the endless rows of bookshelves look like a high-contrast labyrinth. I sat across from Sarah at a heavy oak study table hidden in the back corner. My thick biology textbook was open, but my brain was completely empty. I was still severely traumatized by yesterday's disastrous coffee shop encounter. Sarah aggressively highlighted a paragraph in bright neon yellow. She sighed loudly, shattering the peaceful quiet of our secluded section. I literally cannot process another word about cellular mitosis, Sarah groaned. We have a massive midterm on Friday, I reminded her softly. I know, but my brain is actually melting out of my ears. Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed violently against the hard wooden table. She snatched it up and her face immediately lit up with sheer relief. Oh my God, my savior has arrived, Sarah whispered excitedly. My stomach instantly dropped into an icy, bottomless pit. Who is it? I asked, my voice barely a breathless squeak. Maya, Sarah answered casually, entirely oblivious to my sudden panic. I left my master study guide on the kitchen counter this morning. She was driving by campus and offered to drop it off for me. I stared blankly at Sarah as pure terror seized my chest. Maya was coming here. Right now. I'll be right back, Sarah said, hastily shoving her heavy chair back. Wait, you're leaving me here. I panicked, grabbing her wrist fast. She is waiting in the main lobby, I just have to run down. Watch my stuff, okay? Sarah bolted away before I could formulate a single coherent objection. I was left completely alone in the deadly quiet of the fourth-floor stacks. I took a deep, shaky breath and tried to focus on the textbook. The printed words completely blurred together into meaningless black squiggles. Every tiny sound in the massive library made my racing heart skip a dangerous beat. A heavy book dropping. A wooden chair scraping. Footsteps approaching. The footsteps were distinct, sharp, and totally unhurried. They didn't sound like a stressed college student shuffling around. They sounded deliberate, elegant, and highly dangerous. My breath hitched violently in my tight throat. I didn't even dare to look up from my stupid biology notes. The distinct, intoxicating scent of dark vanilla and expensive perfume hit me first. It completely overpowered the stale, dusty smell of old library books. Hello again, sweetheart. The low, husky whisper came from directly behind my right ear. I physically jumped in my stiff wooden chair. Maya leaned over my shoulder, her front pressing lightly against my tense back. She had completely bypassed Sarah in the main lobby downstairs. She had successfully hunted me down in the quietest, most isolated part of the building. "What are you doing up here?" I hissed in a frantic, panicked whisper. "Sarah went down to the lobby to get the notes from you." Maya chuckled softly, the rich sound vibrating right through my spine. "I gave the notes to the front desk librarian," she murmured smoothly. "I told her Sarah would be down to collect them shortly. I just wanted to come up and see what my favorite girl was doing." She placed both her hands firmly on the table, trapping me in the chair. Her long, elegant fingers rested dangerously close to my trembling hands. "You can't be here," I breathed out, my chest heaving erratically. "This is a strictly designated silent study zone." "I know," Maya whispered, her lips brushing the delicate shell of my ear. "That makes it so much more fun, doesn't it? You can't even scream if you want to." My absolute lack of defense was incredibly and terrifyingly apparent. She slowly traced a lazy, agonizing circle on the back of my hand. The stark white library lighting made her dark eyes look utterly predatory. I tried desperately to slide my chair sideways to escape her physical trap. Maya smoothly shifted her weight, blocking my only exit path entirely. "You look incredibly stressed," she noted quietly. "Are these college classes proving to be too much for you?" "I am perfectly fine," I lied cleanly through my teeth. My voice shook so badly it completely ruined the confident facade. "You are a terrible liar," she stated matter-of-factly. She leaned her head down, resting her chin lightly on my tense shoulder. Her dark silk shirt brushed softly against my bare arm. The contrast between her cool confidence and my total panic was staggering. "Tell me the truth," she demanded softly, her tone shifting to something darker. "Tell me exactly what you are thinking about right now." "Cellular mitosis," I choked out stubbornly. Maya laughed, a quiet, breathy sound that sent electricity straight to my core. Her hand slid smoothly from the table to rest firmly on my thigh. I gasped sharply, the sharp sound echoing loudly in the dead silent aisle. A student 2 tables over glared aggressively in our general direction. "Sure," Maya commanded softly, her thumb pressing into my tense muscle. "You need to keep absolutely quiet in the library, remember?" She was weaponizing the strict environment entirely against me. She knew I would never risk making a huge public scene. She had complete, undeniable leverage over my physical reactions. Her fingers squeezed my thigh gently but with terrifying authority. I bit my lower lip extremely hard to stop myself from making another sound. "Look at you," she whispered, her voice dripping with dark satisfaction. "So incredibly desperate to follow all the rules. So completely terrified of getting caught. But we both know you absolutely love the danger of it." She leaned closer, her soft lips ghosting over my jawline. "You want me to push you," she stated softly. "You want me to completely break your little perfect facade." I couldn't form a single coherent word in response. My brain was entirely flooded with intense adrenaline and overwhelming desire. She was entirely right, and I absolutely hated myself for it. Suddenly, Sarah's loud, echoing voice drifted up from the stairwell. She was coming back up to the 4th floor. Maya's hand instantly vanished from my thigh. The suffocating heat and intense pressure disappeared in a mere millisecond. She stood up completely straight, smoothing out her immaculate silk shirt. When Sarah finally rounded the corner, Maya looked like a perfect, innocent angel. "Oh, hey!" Sarah panted, looking visibly confused by the scene. "The front desk lady said you dropped the notes off and left." "I did," Maya smiled warmly, painting a picture of absolute innocence. "But I realized I left my sunglasses up here when I was studying last week. I just thought I would quickly check the lost and found." She seamlessly fed her sister a flawless, completely believable lie. "Did you find them?" Sarah asked curiously. No, Maya sighed softly, her dark eyes briefly flicking back to my flushed face. But I found something else entirely. Anyway, I have a very important meeting to get to. She patted Sarah affectionately on the shoulder. She didn't say a single word of goodbye to me. She just gave me one last, intensely lingering, predatory look. Then she turned and walked away down the quiet, highly contrasted sunlit aisle. I slumped heavily forward against the hard study table. I buried my fiercely burning face deep into my folded arms. I was entirely and utterly ruined. This was no longer just a playful, teasing little game. This was an all-out psychological war of attrition, and my defenses were completely destroyed. The rain fell heavily on Wednesday night. It washed the city streets in a glossy, dark, hyperrealistic sheen. I stood shivering under the narrow canvas awning of the campus bookstore. My phone battery was completely dead. Sarah had left campus hours ago to finish a late paper. I was entirely stranded in the freezing, relentless downpour. A sleek black car pulled smoothly up to the curb. The dark-tinted passenger window rolled down with a quiet hum. Maya leaned over from the driver's seat. "Get in," she commanded over the loud drumming of the rain. I didn't even hesitate for a single second. I pulled open the heavy door and slipped into the warm leather seat. The loud rain was immediately muffled against the thick, cold glass. The car interior smelled intensely of expensive leather and dark vanilla. Maya put the car in drive without saying another word. The streetlights cast sharp, cinematic shadows across her flawless profile. The neon signs from passing storefronts bled brightly through the wet windshield. The high-contrast lighting made the enclosed space feel incredibly dangerous. It felt like we were trapped inside a highly stylized, moody film set. Maya kept her dark eyes fixed firmly on the slick, wet road. She wasn't teasing me today. She wasn't trying to touch my knee or whisper in my ear. Her hands gripped the steering wheel with relaxed, absolute control. The sudden silence between us was completely deafening. It was entirely different from the suffocating tension in the library. This felt like a deliberate, freezing cold withdrawal. I watched a heavy bead of water roll slowly down the passenger window. My heart was beating with a dull, highly anxious ache. Every single mile we drove closer to my apartment felt like a countdown. I desperately wanted her to look at me. I wanted her to say something incredibly inappropriate and ruin my focus. But she remained a perfect, untouchable statue in the driver's seat. We stopped at a long red light at a completely deserted intersection. The harsh red glow illuminated the sharp, elegant lines of Maya's jaw. "We need to stop this," Maya said quietly into the heavy silence. Her voice completely lacked its usual mocking, velvet purr. It sounded dangerously flat and entirely serious. I froze completely stiff in my heated leather seat. "Stop what?" I asked, my voice barely a cracked whisper. "This little game of ours," she replied, staring straight through the windshield. It was fun at the party. It was highly amusing at the Sunday dinner. But Sarah is my younger sister, and you are her best friend. I shouldn't be messing with your head like this. She turned her head slowly to look directly at me. Her dark eyes were completely unreadable in the heavy, cinematic shadows. "I'm crossing a major line, and I need to step back immediately." She sounded entirely reasonable and totally responsible. She was giving me the perfect, highly logical, safe way out. She was handing me my complete freedom back on a silver platter. The traffic lights suddenly flashed from red to bright green. Maya shifted her intense gaze back to the empty, rain-slicked street. She reached her right hand down to shift the car into drive. A massive, suffocating wave of pure, absolute panic crashed over me. I didn't want the safe way out. I didn't want my boring, peaceful, unbothered freedom back. The thought of her ignoring me tomorrow was 1,000 times worse than her teasing me today. The sudden withdrawal of her predatory attention felt like actual, physical pain. Without thinking, I reached blindly across the dark center console. My trembling hand clamped down firmly over hers on the leather gear shift. My cold skin pressed urgently and desperately against her warm knuckles. Maya instantly slammed her foot down on the brakes. The heavy car jerked to a sudden, violent halt in the middle of the empty road. The only sound left was the rhythmic, heavy beating of the windshield wipers. She stared silently down at our firmly joined hands. Then, she slowly and deliberately looked up into my terrified eyes. The responsible, highly serious older sister facade vanished in a single microsecond. That dark, predatory smirk returned fully to her painted lips with absolute vengeance. Her dark eyes gleamed with a terrifying, entirely triumphant light. She had perfectly and flawlessly engineered this entire quiet conversation. She had deliberately pulled back her attention just to see what I would do. She had set a flawless psychological trap in the dark. And I had practically thrown myself headfirst right into it. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Maya whispered softly. Her voice was a low, highly dangerous rumble that shook my very core. She slowly flipped her hand over beneath my trembling palm. Her long, elegant fingers intertwined perfectly with my shaking ones. She gripped my hand with a terrifying, possessive strength. "Because if you touch me first, the rules completely change. I won't hold back a single thing anymore." I squeezed her warm hand tightly, willingly sealing my own ultimate fate. "I don't want you to hold back," I breathed out into the tense air. Maya laughed, a dark, incredibly satisfied, velvety sound. She pulled the car smoothly over to the pitch-black side of the street. She unbuckled her seatbelt with a sharp, decisive, echoing click. The innocent, highly defensive game was officially over. The absolute, terrifying surrender had finally begun. The metallic click of her seatbelt echoed loudly in the confined space. It sounded exactly like a heavy steel vault locking me inside. I was entirely trapped with her in the pitch-black vehicle. The heavy rain battered relentlessly against the thick safety glass. Neon streetlights bled through the wet windshield in blurry, cinematic streaks. The high-contrast shadows danced dangerously across Maya's flawless, sharp face. She turned her upper body fully toward my side of the car. The sleek leather seats creaked softly under her shifting weight. My breathing became incredibly shallow and painfully fast. She leaned slowly and deliberately across the dark center console. Every single centimeter she moved forward felt like absolute psychological torture. The silence inside the cabin was physically thicker than solid concrete. I could hear the frantic rushing of blood roaring loudly in my own ears. Maya moved with the terrifying, silent grace of a seasoned apex predator. She didn't rush a single, calculated motion. She wanted me to feel every agonizing millisecond of her impending approach. I pressed my back completely flat against the passenger door panel. My tense shoulder blades dug painfully into the hard armrest. The cold, damp glass chilled my spine straight through my thin cotton shirt. Maya didn't stop until she was entirely inside my personal space. Her left arm firmly boxed me in against the heavy door. Her right hand maintained a crushing, possessive grip on my trembling fingers. I was completely caged by her imposing, deeply elegant presence. The intoxicating scent of dark vanilla and rain filled my lungs entirely. I couldn't look away from her deep, fiercely predatory eyes. They were entirely pitch black in the shadowy, hyperrealistic car interior. "You grabbed my hand," she whispered smoothly into the dark. Her warm breath fanned directly across my highly sensitive collarbone. A violent, uncontrollable shiver violently wrecked my entire body. "I did," I admitted, my voice reduced to a pathetic, broken gasp. "You didn't want me to stop," she stated softly and definitively. She absolutely wasn't asking a question. She was forcing me to confront my absolute, undeniable defeat. She slowly released our tightly intertwined, sweaty hands. I immediately missed the burning, grounding heat of her skin. But her hand didn't retreat safely back to her side of the car. Instead, her long, elegant fingers moved slowly up my trembling forearm. They traced a burning, electric path straight up to my tense shoulder. She gently brushed a stray lock of damp hair entirely away from my face. Her cool fingertips lingered deliberately over the frantic pulse point on my neck. "Your heart is completely out of control," she observed with dark amusement. She pressed her thumb slightly harder against the rapidly beating vein. She was physically feeling the absolute chaos she had masterfully orchestrated. "It's entirely your fault," I choked out desperately into the humid air. Maya smiled genuinely in the heavy darkness. It was a devastating, beautiful, and completely terrifying smile. "I know," she murmured softly against the sharp edge of my jawline. She leaned her body in even closer to mine. Our lips were separated by less than a single inch of heavy air. I instinctively closed my eyes in pure, overwhelming anticipation. I waited helplessly for the final, inevitable collision. But she deliberately didn't kiss my waiting mouth. She agonizingly bypassed my lips entirely. She turned her beautiful head slightly to the left side. Her incredibly soft lips brushed lightly against the sensitive skin just below my ear. I let out a sharp, embarrassing, completely involuntary whine. The pathetic sound echoed loudly in the quiet, insulated car cabin. Maya chuckled softly against my heavily flushed, burning skin. The deep, rich vibration sent absolute fireworks straight down my spine. She began to slowly, methodically trace my jawline with her straight nose. Every tiny point of physical contact felt exactly like a literal branding iron. She was meticulously mapping out her newly acquired territory in the dark. "Open your eyes," she commanded softly, right against my ear. Her velvet voice left absolutely zero room for any negotiation. I fluttered my heavy, nervous eyelids open with immense, shaking effort. She was staring directly, piercingly into my very soul. The dim red neon lights illuminated the sheer, absolute dominance in her dark gaze. "Tell me exactly what you want," she demanded in a low, dangerous whisper. My logical brain completely short-circuited under her intense, crushing pressure. "Maya," I pleaded desperately, my voice barely audible over the rain. I didn't even know what I was actually begging for anymore. I just desperately needed the torturous, agonizing physical tension to finally snap. "Use your words, sweetheart," she chided gently, mocking my hesitation. She dragged her soft thumb slowly across my violently trembling lower lip. The slight, deliberate friction sent another massive jolt of electricity through my core. "Say you want me." The absolute, unyielding arrogance of her direct demand was incredibly infuriating. It was also the most deeply, fundamentally attractive thing I had ever witnessed. My remaining pride violently fought a completely losing battle against my desperate desire. I was already completely and utterly ruined anyway. I had already crossed the fatal line the exact second I grabbed her hand. There was absolutely no logical point in pretending to be innocent anymore. "I want you," I whispered back in complete, utter, humiliating defeat. My deeply honest confession hung heavily in the suffocating, humid air between us. Maya's dark eyes visibly darkened even further under the cinematic streetlights. The predatory, smug satisfaction on her flawless face was absolutely lethal. "Good girl," she praised softly into the dark. The condescending, completely thrilling praise made my toes curl instantly inside my shoes. She finally closed the tiny, agonizing, physical distance between us. Her soft lips crashed down heavily against the highly sensitive skin of my neck. She still didn't kiss my lips, maintaining that torturous, highly specific boundary. But the aggressive, open-mouthed kiss against my throat was infinitely more intimate. She sucked gently but firmly on the tender skin right above my collarbone. My empty hands flew up blindly to grab desperate handfuls of her dark silk shirt. I anchored myself fiercely to her solid, commanding, warm frame. The heavy rain continued to pound aggressively against the thick metal roof. It completely and thankfully masked the ragged, desperate sounds of my heavy breathing. She was completely devouring my very last remaining shreds of rational sanity. I was falling endlessly into a dark, incredibly beautiful, deeply dangerous abyss. Suddenly, a blindingly bright pair of headlights swept violently across the dark car. A loud, obnoxious horn blared aggressively from the wet street directly outside. Maya pulled her body back instantly. The sudden, violent loss of her intense heat left me shivering violently in the cold. She seamlessly and gracefully slid right back into the leather driver's seat. She clicked her heavy seatbelt back into place with practiced, terrifying speed. The entire physical transition took less than 3 frantic, blurry seconds. She looked completely composed, utterly untouched, and totally perfect. I, on the other hand, was a complete, heavily panting, totally disheveled disaster. My carefully styled hair was fully messed up. My thin shirt was visibly wrinkled from her firm, aggressive grip. My neck felt incredibly hot, deeply flushed, and distinctly branded by her mouth. "We should probably get you home now," Maya stated calmly. Her crisp voice was completely level, entirely devoid of the raw hunger from seconds ago. She shifted the heavy car back into drive as if absolutely nothing had happened. I stared at her sharp, completely unbothered profile in total, absolute shock. She was an absolute, highly functioning psychological sociopath. She had just completely unraveled my entire existence and neatly packed me back away. I rested my hot, sweating forehead against the freezing, damp passenger window. I was completely trapped in a highly dangerous, incredibly addictive emotional cycle. And the absolute worst part was that I was already eagerly anticipating the next round. The harsh Thursday afternoon sunlight cut sharply across the crowded campus courtyard. Deep, highly cinematic shadows stretched aggressively over the cracked concrete walkways. I stood awkwardly near the rough edge of the large stone fountain. Liam was standing entirely too close to me. He was a senior guy from my advanced biology seminar. He had been persistently trying to ask me out for 3 agonizing weeks. I had politely and firmly rejected him every single time. Today, he was stubbornly refusing to take a simple no for an answer. He took a deliberate, heavy step closer into my highly guarded personal space. His strong cologne smelled incredibly sharp and cheaply synthetic. It made me feel distinctly nauseous compared to the dark vanilla scent I was currently addicted to. "Come on, just one quick dinner," Liam insisted loudly over the ambient noise. He reached out aggressively and wrapped his large, warm hand firmly around my bare upper arm. I immediately tensed up in pure, unadulterated discomfort. I tried forcefully to pull my arm out of his uncomfortably tight grip. He stubbornly didn't let go. Suddenly, the loud background noise of the busy campus seemed to completely freeze. I looked frantically over Liam's broad shoulder toward the heavy glass doors of the Humanities building. Sarah was walking cheerfully out into the blinding bright sunlight. Maya was walking directly and silently beside her. Maya wore a sharply tailored, pitch-black blazer that looked incredibly, terrifyingly intimidating. She was casually listening to her younger sister talk about her day. Then, her dark, predatory eyes flicked over to the stone fountain. She saw me. More importantly, she saw Liam's hand wrapped tightly around my skin. The sudden physical transformation was absolutely terrifying to witness in real time. The elegant, calm, perfectly collected older sister vanished in a fraction of a microsecond. Pure, unadulterated, Dark possessiveness instantly violently possessed her flawless features. She didn't say a single word to Sarah. She simply changed her forward trajectory and walked straight toward us. Her expensive high heels clicked heavily against the concrete. It sounded exactly like the rhythmic, deadly precision of a ticking time bomb. The high-contrast, cinematic shadows seemed to literally part out of her way. Liam finally noticed my deeply panicked expression and turned around. Maya stopped exactly 1 foot away from his broad back. "Excuse me," Maya said into the tense air. Her velvet voice was incredibly and dangerously quiet. It was the exact kind of dead quiet that precedes a devastating, catastrophic earthquake. Liam let go of my arm instantly and spun around in total confusion. He looked up at Maya, completely and utterly oblivious to the immense danger he was in. "Can I help you?" he asked in a highly defensive, arrogant tone. Maya didn't even bother to look at his mediocre face. Her pitch-black eyes were completely, intensely locked onto the reddened skin of my arm where his hand had just been. "You are currently breathing my oxygen," Maya stated smoothly. She finally shifted her terrifying, bottomless gaze up to meet his eyes. The absolute, freezing, toxic venom in her stare made Liam physically stumble backward. "I was just talking to her," he stammered nervously, losing all his false bravado. Maya smiled. It was the most horrific, beautiful, predatory, deeply unsettling smile I had ever seen in my life. "If you ever dare to touch her again, I will personally and meticulously ruin your entire pathetic existence," she whispered beautifully. She didn't raise her perfectly modulated voice even a single decibel. She delivered the absolute, life-destroying threat with the casual elegance of ordering a simple cup of coffee. Liam's face instantly drained of all its natural, living color. He didn't dare to say another single word in his own defense. He practically tripped over his own clumsy feet as he turned around. He practically sprinted away in pure terror across the sunny, crowded courtyard. I stood there completely paralyzed by the sheer, devastating display of her raw, unchecked power. Sarah finally jogged up to us, entirely out of breath and oblivious. "What did Liam want?" Sarah asked casually, totally unaware of the psychological murder that had just occurred. "Nothing," Maya answered flawlessly, instantly turning back to her sister with a warm, angelic expression. "He just realized he was incredibly late for his next class." Sarah nodded easily, perfectly and blindly accepting the smooth lie. "I'm going to run to the campus cafe to grab a quick sandwich before my next lecture," Sarah announced brightly. "Do you guys want anything?" "No, thank you, sweetie," Maya replied gently and perfectly. Sarah smiled brightly and headed off quickly toward the busy food court. The exact second Sarah was completely out of earshot, the warm angel mask completely shattered again. Maya turned back to me with eyes as black and infinite as actual pitch. She stepped directly and aggressively into my personal space. She effectively trapped me between her solid body and the rough, sun-baked stone fountain. She reached out and grabbed my bare upper arm. She specifically and intentionally grabbed the exact spot where Liam had just touched me. Her long, elegant fingers dug fiercely into my soft, trembling muscle. It wasn't painful, but it was incredibly, undeniably, intensely possessive. "Are you letting other random people play with you now?" she demanded in a low, absolutely furious whisper. "No," I answered breathlessly, my heart hammering violently against my bruised ribs. "Good," she growled softly, stepping even closer until our chests almost touched. "Because you are my absolute, exclusive property right now. You don't get to look at anyone else but me. You don't get to let anyone else touch you but me." Her absolute lack of her usual, terrifying control was completely and utterly intoxicating. The master manipulator was finally showing her own deep, desperate, obsessive cracks. I looked boldly and breathlessly up into her furious, stunningly beautiful face. I realized with absolute, terrifying certainty that she was just as deeply trapped in this dangerous game as I was. Tomorrow was Friday. The tightly coiled tension between us was about to completely and violently snap. The heavy oak door of my apartment swung open wide. Maya stood silently in the hallway, dripping wet from the relentless storm. She didn't wait for an invitation to walk into my life tonight. She stepped across the threshold with a chilling, quiet authority. She slammed the heavy door shut behind her with a definitive, jarring thud. The sound of the deadbolt locking echoed like a final, irreversible verdict. I backed away from her until I hit the cold living room wall. The dim, ambient light from the street cast long, dark shadows across her face. She looked absolutely terrifying and devastatingly beautiful in the gloom. She didn't bother to take off her heavy, soaking wet trench coat. She just walked straight toward me, her eyes locked onto mine. Her gaze felt like a physical weight pinning me against the plaster. "You've been trying to hide from me all day," she said softly. Her voice sounded like dry, jagged glass dragging over my raw nerves. "I wasn't hiding," I whispered, my voice failing me completely. "You were," she countered, stepping into my very restricted personal space. She gripped both of my wrists and pinned them tightly above my head. Her strength was surprising, focused, and utterly, totally absolute. "You are so afraid of how much you need me," she whispered. She leaned her forehead against mine, her skin burning with intense heat. "You are terrified that you've finally lost all your control." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. I couldn't even think a single rational, self-preserving thought. "Is it true?" she demanded, her teeth grazing the sensitive skin of my throat. "Tell me you are finally as desperate as I am." I looked at her, seeing the raw, unfiltered obsession in her dark eyes. She was breaking. She was absolutely shattering her perfect, cool, collected facade for me. I sobbed out, the confession tearing through my chest. "I've been desperate for you for 6 long, agonizing years." Maya let out a shaky, jagged breath that sounded almost like a cry. She crushed her lips against mine with total, unbridled, destructive force. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an absolute claim of ownership. It was a desperate, messy, overwhelming collision of 2 starving souls. Her hands moved down from my wrists to roam possessively over my body. She marked every inch of me as her private, exclusive territory. The entire world outside my apartment wall ceased to exist completely. There was no Sarah. There were no university classes. There was no tomorrow. There was only this dark, suffocating, intensely heated moment. She pulled back just enough to look at my swollen, trembling lips. "You don't get to run away anymore," she warned, her voice trembling. "I won't let you ever go." I leaned into her, hungry for the danger she represented. "I don't want to go," I whispered against her neck. I felt her thumb brush over my racing pulse one last time. She kissed the mark she had left on my collarbone earlier. "Mine," she murmured into my skin with possessive, terrifying finality. I wrapped my arms tightly around her wet, soaking trench coat. I accepted the dark, heavy weight of her obsession gladly. The rain outside continued to lash against the glass with violent fury. But in here, the storm was finally, permanently locked inside. I was completely, irrevocably, and happily ruined by her touch. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the narrow gaps of the white blinds. Sharp, linear beams of golden light sliced across my cluttered bedroom floor. I woke up with the terrifying, sharp jolt of a sudden, loud sound. The front door of my apartment clicked open with familiar, careless ease. "I brought coffee and bagels." Sarah's cheerful voice echoed down the hall. I scrambled frantically out of bed in a total, panicked blur. Maya was already moving with cold, calculated, lightning-fast precision. She snatched her dark blazer from the back of my desk chair. She pulled her disheveled hair back into a sleek, professional ponytail. She looked as calm, detached, and perfectly composed as a statue. I struggled to pull on an oversized hoodie to cover the evidence on my neck. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely fasten the zipper. Sarah pushed open the bedroom door just as I stood up straight. She paused, her eyes darting between me and her older sister. "Maya?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with genuine, total confusion. "What are you doing here at 8 in the morning?" Maya didn't even blink for a single, long, measured second. "I was on my morning run and saw your car," she lied smoothly. "I stopped by to see if you wanted to grab some lunch later." Sarah's face brightened instantly, completely buying the polished, flawless deception. "I totally forgot you run on Saturdays," she laughed happily. "I'm just glad you're here to help me drag her to the library." I stood there in the center of the room, silently suffocating. I could feel the heavy, dark weight of the secret burning my skin. Maya walked calmly past me toward the bright, open apartment hallway. She stopped abruptly when she was directly behind my tense back. She leaned down, her lips brushing lightly against the edge of my ear. Her hand reached out and gripped the fabric of my hood tightly. She pushed the edge of the fabric down just enough to expose my neck. Her cool, sharp fingernail traced the tender, red mark she had left last night. It was a cold, deliberate, and final act of absolute possession. Sarah was still rambling about her biology notes in the kitchen. She couldn't see what was happening 2 feet behind her back. "Don't look so terrified, sweetheart," Maya whispered, mocking my visible dread. "It's just a little bit of evidence that you belong to me." She pulled her hand away with a cold, triumphant, satisfied smirk. "I'll see you both at the library," she said to the room at large. She walked out the front door, leaving it open to the bright hallway. The sound of her heels clicking away felt like a fading heartbeat. I stood in the center of the room, my legs feeling like liquid. Sarah walked back in, holding out a steaming cup of dark coffee. "She's always so intense, right?" Sarah joked, oblivious to everything. I took the coffee cup, my fingers trembling against the hot ceramic. "Yeah," I whispered, staring at the empty, open doorway. "She's incredibly, terrifyingly intense." I knew my life was never going to be normal ever again. I was bound to her by a secret that could destroy everything. And as I looked at Sarah's smiling face, I felt a sharp, cold sting of guilt. But beneath the guilt, there was a deep, dark, undeniable rush of adrenaline. The game had officially ended, but the reality was infinitely more dangerous. I took a sip of the coffee and stared into the mirror. The mark on my neck was hidden, but I could feel it burning. I was hers, completely and irrevocably, until the very end. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't even slightly afraid.